places, climate jobs in buildings. So that's warm homes for the recording purposes, warm homes, healthy workplaces, climate jobs in buildings, with a primary focus on retrofitting of homes and buildings, a contribution that could make to the climate emergency, and of course the huge number of jobs that not only could be created but must and would need to be created, skilled, trained work in order to actually deliver that programme of work. My name is Suzanne Jeffrey. I am the editor of the updated report, Climate Jobs Building Workforce for the Climate Emergency, and also chair. Okay, thanks for that message, David. I think David has given me a message that I'm cutting out. So what I will do, yeah, I'll do this, David, perhaps in a minute. I'm going to see if I can switch to internet. Hope that I can keep their thumb up if that's okay. Right, I see no thumbs going up, so I need to try and switch to a different internet connection. Okay, I'm really hoping that that has done the trick and that people can hear. Great, thank you, Gabriella. Okay, so my name is Suzanne Jeffrey. I'm chair of the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group and editor of the report. Just a couple of words from me on the report, the broader report itself, and then I'm going to introduce our speakers for tonight's session. So our report updates previous work produced by the Campaign Against Climate Change, 1 million climate jobs, and does so in the context of the urgency of the climate crisis, and hence a real focus on the whole transition and transformation that would needed across the economy in order to really tackle and with the urgency required the climate crisis. The report very much argues that in doing that there would be a transition for some work and employment, but largely this is about the creation of work that would be needed in order to tackle the climate emergency. So many more than 1 million climate jobs. And the report also asserts that the market has not delivered, and that there needs to be, as part of our campaigning and as part of our demands, the demand for key sectors of the economy to be in public ownership, and therefore to be able to be used for public good, and in this case for marshalling the forces, the work, the jobs that are needed to tackle the climate emergency. And on the question of retrofitting, I think we've got some, and what the insulation needed in our homes, there are really, really clear, consistent examples of the failure of the market. Most recently, of course, the Green Homes Grant, launched by this government, this Conservative government, in which the same pattern re-emerged. Large amounts of money, not enough, but large amounts of money shoveled towards sectors of the private sector, largely ill-equipped to deliver what they have been asked to do. Then a gap between what they've been asked to do and the actual delivery of it, and then a shelving of the project, with big gaps in terms of what happens next. And that's a pattern that's been repeated over and over again. Meanwhile, very little investment in the training that needs to take place. But that's for others to talk about in much more depth than this. I would finish, I think, before I introduce the speakers, by saying that on the back of the IPCC report today, which again underlines the urgency of the climate crisis, but also underlines that we have time, but a tiny window. The authors have indicated a tiny window, a decade to do something. Then there is a big transition of the economy that's needed, but actually this is an area which very much could be something that's immediately prioritized and would have a huge impact, not just in reducing emissions, but also in tackling other questions or problems of social inequality and poverty, making a dent in the cost of living crisis as our homes become more insulated and less difficult and less costly to heat, and very much could play a major role in creating work, not just in high industry intensive areas, but right across the country, and allowing our young people and older people as well to play a significant role in tackling the climate emergency. So it really is an area which lends itself to immediate action taking place, and something that we can collectively, I think, get behind, both in terms of the climate movement, the trade union movement, and beyond. In tonight's meeting, and thanks so much, there's a great attendance for tonight's meeting. Do feel free to say hello to each other in the chat. The meeting is being recorded, and we will have plenty of for discussion. If you don't want to be recorded in the discussion, just please just pop it in the chat and we can switch the recording off at that stage. Or if you're happy to be heard but want to switch off your camera, that will be all very good. So we have a really excellent panel of speakers here tonight, and I'm going to introduce the speakers in a little bit more detail as we come along. Our opening three speakers will be, I'll get a little bit more info as I introduce them, will be Ellen Rowbottom and Wolfgang Kuchler. They are the co-authors of the chapter in the Climate Jobs, Building a Climate Workforce for the Climate Emergency report. We also are joined by Linda Clark, who was certainly part of the team providing expertise and insight, and Linda does a lot of work in this area across a whole number of fields. So it's a really good introductory panel. We'll stop at that after we've heard those three speakers for a little bit of discussion, debate, questions, and then we have a couple more people we'd like to introduce to you, and then we'll have some more time for discussion after that. So Ellen, welcome again. And let me hand over to you for your introduction into the chapter and what's covered in that chapter in the report.
Brilliant. Right. Sorry, that is just the first page of our general slideshow. So here, I'm just going to give a kind of quite a galloping overview of the chapter, including some of the points that Suzanne's touched on as to why the retrofitting of buildings is so key to decarbonising our economy. And before handing over to Wolfgang and then to Linda to go into into more depth about some of our reasoning in the proposals that we've made, and also some of the barriers and difficulties that we're going to face. So I've just added this bit, which is really to do with as much to do with the energy system as to do with buildings, because having worked on the energy system, the role of buildings has become ever more clear to me. So to decarbonise the energy system, we need to roughly double our electricity generation obviously solely from renewables, but also we need to cut our overall energy needs by about half. That is across the entire economy. If we don't do that, then we're not going to be able to decarbonise the energy system. That will become technologically impossible. Now, homes and other buildings play an enormous role in this. In 2019, total energy used in homes contributed 21% of UK greenhouse gas emissions, a majority of which was from the direct burning of fuels for heating and for hot water, which is obviously mostly gas. But as well as reducing our raw demand, we need to, as far as possible, to reduce the daily and seasonal peaks in demand that will be such a headache for the generating and transmission systems. through, because we're using largely intermittent generating methods as well, and so a variety of approaches need to be used for this. Overall demand reduction is key, but also load spreading, and homes in particular are a major source of peaks and troughs, as we understand. You know, you get home from work, you put the kettle on, you put your heating on, etc. It's different than it is in summer, and so on. So the insulating homes and install the heating technologies that use absolutely minimal electricity, on-site generation, for example, solar panels, and on-site storage of various kinds will all be very key in contributing not just to cutting overall demand, but also to reducing those peaks in demand and spreading the load. So, okay, the headline figures of the chapter: heating homes uses around 370 terawatt hours a year of energy. Heating, well, focusing on heating here because this is the key part of cutting emissions, but obviously there's a lot said about cutting electricity as well from other the use of household goods such as washing machines or whatever. But so this energy can be this energy demand could be cut in half, roughly half, by within about 10 years. And far after that, and our conclusion has been, through modelling the kind of workforce that needs to be built up, is that by the end of a 10-year period, we would have needed to have built up to an additional 2 million workers, most of whom will require training, either from scratch or further training, building on the skills they already have. So some of the issues and barriers that we need to deal with. So every building needs a thorough skilled assessment and a whole house plan, no one size fits all. Thorough training, understanding of the energy dynamics of the whole house. Accountability and monitoring of standards is essential, which clearly we don't have at the moment under the current system, where so much building and retrofit is outsourced through the corporate sector with very unaccountable sort of outsourcing chains. But also that there's been a huge amount of failed retrofit, which is a consequence of in part of things being done in a kind of piecemeal way, one intervention without thinking about the knock-on effects it's going to have on other aspects of the home. So also we need to there's a lot to be done to build up supply chains, in particular for low carbon insulating materials, but also for components such as triple glazed windows, heat pumps, etc. And then in terms of how this is managed and funded, as Suzanne's already mentioned, we've had this kind of hodgepodge of basically quite piddling incentives to homeowners that are really badly targeted, ineffective, can collapse the work being done, and also small grants to local authorities, which means they spend all their time chasing grants that they might not get, but can only do a fraction of the work that needs doing. And then another issue is the current composition of the construction industry, which I suspect Linda will have a bit more to say about. Our proposals are for in summary, a mass retrofit programme using unionised direct labour as the core employment model. That is not to say that we don't recognise the value of some of the community initiatives, the cooperatives and things like that that are already really at the cutting edge of some of this work. But we need in order to get it done at speed and to get it done efficiently, there needs to be a UK-wide integrated programme, and really some of these community initiatives can be supported within that umbrella, but that needs to be the central concept, and that will be part of a national climate service, which would also include direct labour working in other sectors such as energy, transport, and some of the and key parts of industry and manufacturers. The retrofit programme would likely need to be managed by local authorities, which clearly need far more funding and far more powers to be able to manage this work, and also would need to be very much working in collaboration with local training providers, be that big FE colleges or be it smaller organisations that up to now have been unable to offer much in the way of training because they're too small and don't have the finances. And we also need to get cracking on large scale projects that are large enough in scale that they can carry training, they can carry apprenticeships, they can provide opportunities for learning about what works and what doesn't work so well, and for the development of the local supply chains. And then the model that we've used for how this would actually be done and how we would build up the workforce is that we've arrived at an idea that we need a two-phase approach for the majority of the homes to allow for growing skilled workforce from a pretty base, but also that we can do the things the most quickly that are going to give us the quickest cuts in emissions, and I would add to that that will most rapidly solve the difficulties of people in the most acute fuel poverty, which is obviously becoming more and more of an issue at the moment. And then ultimately, by the end of the programme, we would have retrofitted all the homes and other buildings to the highest possible standard, and with appropriate on-site generation. And so to summarise that, that should ultimately give us a 95% reduction in emissions from buildings as we use them. And of course, we need to attend to the embodied energy and spelling mistake there, but embodied emissions in buildings, which is a discussion about the choice of materials, recycling and renovating rather than demolishing, a lot of big political issues there. I'm going to hand over to Wolfgang now so that we can discuss some of those points in more depth.
Brilliant, thank you, Ellen. So if I can just welcome Wolfgang, and as I said earlier, Wolfgang's the co-author of this chapter. Wolfgang is also a practising architect, experienced in delivering low carbon, low energy retrofit homes, so speaks from professional experience as well as a political commitment to the work that we need to do in this area. So welcome, Wolfgang.
Thank you. I'd like to say I'm experienced in trying to deliver this rather than actually delivering. So thanks to Ellen for that introduction, which has covered the key framing, which is always hard to do, and a lot of the points. So I'm going to show some slides. The slides won't necessarily relate to what I'm saying, but they will to illustrate it. If there's any questions on what you see as what you hear, then it can come in the discussion. So many of us have been feeling for a while that we wanted to actually, if we're working in construction, to actually start putting some specific demands in place. There was a demonstration in 2019, colleagues. Buildings are a massive source of emissions, and public buildings and commercial buildings are a massive source of emissions, but I'm going to focus on housing because it's something that everybody knows. There's been a lot of work done on it, and we've done a lot of work on it. But we also talk about that in our pamphlet and in the technical companion. There's some office buildings and some retail parks there. There's been a lot of reports, some of them from the government, some of them quite good, but not being listened to by the government. Other reports by people in construction or people on the left who are trying to get the same sort of thing done that we want to be done. And one of the best ones is from the New Economics Foundation, where they actually looked at the same kind of thing that we're looking at from a point of view of numbers, jobs, of measures, of money spent. Other organizations have done a lot of really good work on this. What we see as our role is to try and connect the numbers to how do it in practical terms, and also how we'd actually get it done politically and democratically. I started looking at this in Bristol and started working out how it could be done, and it was quite reassuring to work out that you could actually do a whole city, even using training up and using the workforce that existed locally. Over time, it seemed feasible. The amount of money was a lot, but not impossible. So that was a starting point, and that came about the same time as we were starting on the pamphlet. So it was useful sort of exercise. I wouldn't agree with all the numbers that I came up with then. On the left, just for reference, is an insulated house. At the bottom, the blue one. That's the blue means that the energy has been kept nice and inside, not leaking out, and the yellow ones are typical ones where the energy is leaking out. So I'm not going to focus on the slide, but that is a spreadsheet that I did of jobs based on the important fact that we haven't got many people who actually have the skills at the moment. So retrofit is not easy, even though some of the work is easy. Some of the work involved in retrofit could be done by a kid or by a pensioner or by me or anyone else, but the overall picture is more complicated, and it needs to be planned, it needs to be financed, and people do need new skills, and some of the work is actually quite hard. So there are 28 million homes in the UK, and 19 million of them don't even have what's called Energy Performance Certificate Level C, which was, when they brought the certificates in, seen as sort of like a realistic minimum to strive for. And there's been a lot of talk about getting them all up to that level by 2030, but there's not been anything like the kind of action needed to do more than 1% of that, or less probably. Give you an idea of, I'm working on some old council houses where they're currently using 200 kilowatt hours for every square meter of their floor in a year. If they were at level C, they'd be using perhaps a quarter of that, or a third of that. So it would mean getting places that are warmer when they need to be warmer, that use less energy generally, and of course massively reducing emissions. So the big innovation, if you like, that we've made is to say that we agree with the NEF that there are, I've taken it from their report, but basically the idea that there are some measures which you can say, these are the key things, the low-hanging fruit, if you want to put it like that, key things we can do, so long as they're combined carefully, to actually quickly get a lot of houses, I say quickly, I'm talking about over a 10-year period, get a lot of homes up to that sort of level, so that they're much, much better than they were. And then there are other homes where you literally have to strip them right down, old homes, Georgian houses or some Victorian ones, strip them right down to bricks and then insulate and seal them up and consider all the materials and repair as you go from top to bottom, something that can almost never be done with the people living in them. And we have chosen to carry on having an element of those for two reasons. One, because it helps to train people, and two, because there is actually a social justice element to this. There are a lot of the poorest and most discriminated against people are living in those sort of buildings as well as others, and therefore we need to take some of those on. The things that I put there, which I'm not going to go through in the detail that I hoped, basically show that if you train, we're starting from a very low point. There are probably only 1,000 to 2,000 people in the UK who really understand enough about how to do this properly to be a safe pair of hands. It's growing. Is saying we can grow that number, and as people, both builders and people who need to assess the buildings and design the schemes are growing in number, they can train other people and they can lead other people. So you already have a thing called a competency ratio, where if one person actually knows what they're doing, they can have 3 other people, so long as they listen to what they're told and so on, and they can learn on the job. And gradually you build that workforce. So for example, the column E on this thing shows that at the end of the 10-year period, the workers who are engaged, of whom 500,000 have had the training, but these are all learning as they go. And then some of them can be doing these very deep retrofits, and some of them can be doing the slightly easy ones. These would take about 6 months for 4 workers, and that's a figure that we've got from a few different sources. It's quite typical. You don't need to throw, you can imagine you're going to be taping round timber joists, you're going to be cutting something and moving it and putting it aside and putting something else in its place. it's fiddly, but you don't need hundreds of people. These can be done with larger numbers quicker, maybe one house a month or something like that. And so that's where the job numbers come from. If you want to put it in a different way, you can say that deep retrofit gives you half a home per year per person, and the smaller packages, which are still a collection of onto that, maybe do 3 per year per worker, and that can also be translated into money, and many people have done that, and I'm not going to go into that now. But the other thing you need in both cases is preparation. So you really need, this is just an example of some of the discussions documents that we produced to actually go through, is looking through other people's reports and comparing figures, and also looking at where these workers are going to come from, which I think other people talk about. And so the preparation, you need to go into a home and find out what it's made of. That might mean actually breaking into things and seeing what the materials are at the moment and things that you can't see. Talk to the residents, find out how they use the home, when they use their energy, what the problems they've had, and then also get them on board to actually have the work done. And then you need to design it. And even if, for example, you're doing a limited package, that might mean you're doing, as we are in the photos I'm showing on this page, we're doing outside insulation, we're doing roof insulation, we're doing windows. We're not doing floors, we're not doing at this stage things like heat pumps, but we are also doing ventilation, because if we didn't do the ventilation, they're guaranteed to get mold with their new warmer, moister homes. So that package needs to be designed, and then you need to test that to see if the people who are going to do the work are actually happy with designs, if they can do it. And if they're not, you need to build in a time to train them up. You need to find out how much it's going to cost, and then you need to prepare to buy the stuff. Some of the materials in these pictures you cannot get. Some of these materials, they're in such short supply, even just because there's a few hundred homes being done in the UK now. Heat pumps, we've got a scheme of just under 200 homes in Leeds. They can't get more than 30 heat pumps of the same type, and the council doesn't want lots of different heat pumps. So there's a new factory being opened up to start using heat pumps, but all of these things have to be planned in. And the lessons to date, this is on the right is the Leeds scheme, where it's flats, and the photograph on the bottom shows a house that's got its insulation on, and then it's had its render. The old ones were pebble dash, and they've kept with the pebble dash, but it's a bit lighter. And the heat pump is on a bracket because we don't know which heat pump we were going to get, so we had to make it fit all sizes. This is the Northamptonshire. All the windows are taped up. There's an air pressure test going on in the house there. There's a new fan in the roof. The government, as Ellen rightly said, and Suzanne at the beginning, has done for social housing small drips of funding with rushed bidding. So you're actually going out and saying, oh, I'm going to have a guess at this and hope it's all right. And then before you know it, you've actually got the builder with a drawing that was based on a guess, and somebody who's never done it before. It's a recipe for disaster. And for the private sector, it's been grants which haven't been paid. Only 10% of the money in the Green Homes grant deal was taken up, if that. So what we need is, here's a little bit on the workforce, which I think Linda's going to talk more on, but I did a quick search on, there's loads and loads of vacancies, which is not something we anticipated, but there are in construction. And on my local tech college, there are 42 courses. Not one of them mentions low carbon building whatsoever, and it's not because they're evil people, it's because they don't need to offer them, because who wants it? They want basic ordinary book standard ones. I'm sure that some of the courses will have that content, but not at a high level. So what we need is a planned investment program. We need the very important and very controversial feature of the program is free at the point of use, like the NHS. And that's because at the moment, you've got a whole, we could talk about it in the discussion, but that is one of the important things, because at the moment, if you're a private tenant, you've got no chance whatsoever, unless your landlord is a saint of some sort. And if you're a private owner, then you're carrying the can for the planet by paying for it yourself, particularly since there are a lot of private owners, particularly in the North and Midlands, who are not that rich. And then you've got council tenants who are also, to some extent, victims of whatever the council can get hold of. And we need the education programme alongside it, and we need standards, which I can also talk about in the discussion. The government has actually backtracked on building standards. It's appalling. So to get all this stuff in the current climate, because a lot of these reports were done when we've hoped for a change of government, it's going to mean a fight. And I think that Insulate Britain have a point, that actually militancy around day-to-day bread and butter issues like insulation is a really good idea. Our angle on it is that we, even if we feel that a lot of the public are not on board with this and have got their head in the sand in some ways, we think we can carry people with us. There are a whole series of reasons that people will probably come into the discussion why people will start to change their minds if they think there's a chance of doing this sort of thing. And there are ways to campaign which can bring a lot of people on board. So, for example, trade unions still have, well, slightly increased in number, 6.4 million members, which is only half of what they had when I was 18. But where else have you got 6.4 million organized in the democratic organization where the basic ethos is sticking together and collective values? So that's a very powerful cog in the machinery of society if we can get this message in there. So the picture on the top left shows the Guest Keenan Metal Folds strikers protesting about the closure or the planned potential closure of the drive shaft plant in Smethwick, which produces drive shafts for petrol-driven and diesel-driven vehicles. So obviously that's an industry which is potentially going to suffer in the change, even if it's using electrified vehicles to do. That was where my dad actually worked, not as an engineer, but as a printer. So they're the kind of people who might lose their jobs, but who also have the kind of skills that could easily be, potentially be transferred into, for example, creating heat pumps. Bottom right is the Coventry bin workers, a different group of people with a different issue, but nevertheless, people who are radicalized and who are obviously worth talking to spread the word. Top right is Bristol New Green councillors. Again, they say they're imprisoned at the moment by the mayor system, but they are people who could actually be lobbied and say, well, we want you to start pushing for this programme. Bottom left is some empty houses, which could flats near me, which could easily be renovated without anyone being in this level. So our idea is to get placards out and get this campaign going. There are a couple of other things I wanted to say. One is about councils.
Wolfgang, you will need to finish up soon.
Yeah, I realised that the last couple of points is going to make me go over. Sorry. The local councils are. I want to talk about the way in which the National Climate Service that we propose fits into this, and how it coordinates, because and the private sector and the public sector. So local councils once had the power to plan education and housing at scale. That isn't the case at the moment, but it could be revived. They're still democratically accountable, and they can consult and with people in their neighbourhoods and actually help to create a package, find out who's actually willing to join the package and so on. Stage of contact before the National Climate Service comes in and actually designs schemes for different streets and areas. And the National Climate Service can coordinate the work side and link to the colleges to get to agree the training standards and requirements. And yes, as Ellen said, it can employ people directly. But as well as employing assessors and builders directly, it can also, because we're one of the key things of our campaign is that we're practical. We know where the industry is at. We're looking at the reality. We're not just saying if you spend this £1 million, then tomorrow it will happen, which is what a lot of reports from the government side might do. It needs is that actually you can go to the private sector and say, okay, have you got trained people who've been through the National Climate Service training? Have you got people who can meet those standards? Okay, well, we'll affiliate somebody to you or whatever, but you can actually be part of those. You can be part of this. Because we're not going to instantly have an instant nationalised workforce, or even the cooperative organisations that Ellen talked about are not going to meet the demand. So I think it's that kind of role, and it can be done and it needs to be done. And the sooner we get this onto placards, into union and council meetings, tenants and residents associations, parent-teacher meetings, gurdwaras, synagogues, churches, the more chance we have of turning it into reality, or even a part of it into reality and more of it later. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Wolfgang. And Wolfgang finished there with two really important points. One is about the fact that education, the colleges are often not running the courses that are needed to train. Education more broadly has no focus on this because there's no place for people to go when they have that training, because there's no investment taking place, and it becomes a horrible catch-22, which no movement takes place. And the second point that Wolfgang raised at the end about the need for campaigning on this and what kind of campaigning can we do, and I think that will be part of the discussion. Hopefully we'll bring in a couple of other speakers later to speak to that as well. I'd like to thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you, Ellen. I'd like to introduce and Linda is a professor in the Department of the Built Environment at Westminster University. Linda Clark has great deal of experience in investigating what kind of training does need to take place and what would need to make that training part of our education and training system. So Linda, I'm going to welcome you and ask you to make your contribution, please.
Thank you, Suzanne, and for asking me to unmute. And I should say that as far as my experience goes, we did a large project for the European Commission on vocational education and training for low energy construction in 10 European countries. And we're currently engaged in research really for the Canadian building trade unions on embedding climate literacy into the building trades, where we're looking at what's particularly UK, Ireland and Scandinavia. So I'll share my screen if that's okay, if I can finish that. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can see Linda, yeah.
Fine. I'm actually from the Centre for the Study of the Production of the Built Environment, and pictures are always important, aren't they? So these photos here, the top one is a passive house retrofit scheme in Camden for a housing cooperative. The picture on the lower right is a large retrofit scheme in Glasgow that was undertaken by Glasgow City Council. I mean, this was 350 units, so quite big. And the other pictures, the bottom one is actually the heat pump unit that was needed for this. So we have to then see that you really, and it really needs, particularly if it's ground source heat pump, to be a distance from the development, and it's rather large, as you see from the other pictures, which is inside this unit. And actually it had a gas backup, I don't know why, but that you'll see that it's very complex as well. And that of course brings up the whole question of skills and training. Now, all our work has shown just how important it is to have a well-trained workforce, and that the expertise needed for retrofitting is maybe an adjustment of what's already going on in existing occupations or expansion, but it's definitely a deepening. There's need for significant knowledge on, for instance, eliminating thermal bridges, on new materials. Now, the pictures I've got at the top here are from an Italian training center that's run by the unions with solar panels, and then the middle picture is of hemp and lime, which they were in the training center. People were being trained to use, particularly for insulation material. And then the final picture is, of course, where we see all the heat loss going out of our traditional houses. So that's need for knowledge and climate literacy. Now, this is something that is often missing, even when you've got a very energy literate curriculum, the actual rationale for why you're doing what you're doing, which is really important for construction workers to know, really, to see what the point of what they're all this learning is critical. Know-how and competencies, particularly things like communication, which you need, especially with retrofitting, to talk to and to be able to talk to the existing tenants and about what you're doing and why you're doing it and what's needed. And of course, in this day and age, data processing, because this can be also a highly digitalized process. So these are aspects which are not generally in the curriculum, as Wolfgang's already said. And particularly we're concentrating on the building envelope occupations, which roofing, especially important, glazing, for instance, and the building services, which are particular, and of course with the building envelope insulation and building services occupations, which are especially plumbing and heating and ventilating and electrical work. So those are the kind of occupations which are kind of critical for a retrofit program. But this, in a way, certainly in the UK, implies a transformation of the vocational education system to develop that kind of occupational capacity that you need if you want to understand the whole building and the occupational interfaces, because it's critical in any training process for low energy construction that you understand what everybody else is doing. Otherwise, you get an electrician going through the insulation, classic example. And you also need to bridge this professional operative divide to create opportunities for people to be able to move from say working as a carpenter into more professional work. Integrated team working is absolutely critical, and that implies, if you have got a subcontract chain, regulating it, but ideally having a directly employed workforce. And above all, it needs to involve value labour, involve the trade unions, involve educationalists and employees. And there is such an obsession in this country to have an employer-based system that doesn't come naturally. In fact, I spend a lot of my time saying, why aren't the unions involved in this? Including in the new London Mayor's Academies. So the main problem, of course, is that the construction industry, now it's dominated by micro firms. Now, and if you've got this produces a very weak training infrastructure, especially as half the workforce is self-employed. So the whole idea of, particularly with apprenticeships, which really depend on quite a systematic work-based training, that's very difficult to achieve. In fact, certainly in the London area, there's almost a total reliance on the migrant workforce, and also at the same time, very severe skill shortages. I can go to a site and they're telling me they can't recruit people. And the workforce is old, it's male, it's white, few young people coming in. And at the same time, the industry is very factional, with very fragmented, divided trades, a dependence on agency labour, as I said, self-employment, labour-only subcontractors, and this just reinforces all these sectoral divisions, which you don't want for a successful retrofit programme, because you don't want a fragmented process. You need a very integrated teamwork. In fact, the impact of this is really evident if you go from the statistics. I mean, construction apprenticeships have absolutely plummeted, which is not surprising given this lack of a training infrastructure. And what has happened instead, and almost people haven't seemed to notice this half the time, is that there's a lot of construction training going on in colleges, but they're full-time. A lot of youngsters go full-time into colleges because they wanted to train and go into construction. And then the problem is to get the work-based experience. Now, this is just one example of the College of North East London, which I've go to a lot. They've had 1,300 construction trainees training up to level 2. Now, of those, only 70 are apprentices. And what seems to be happening, and this is really important to understand for setting up retrofitting, is that you get youngsters going in and going up to level 2, and then many just fall away because they can't find the work, because they haven't got the experience. So ideally what you want to do is to take that level 2 and then they become apprentices. Now that is in fact beginning to happen. But they take the money that you can get in relation to apprenticeships to go from level 2 to level 3, having got a basic grounding in the college. I mean, I've talked already about what's called employer disengagement, despite the fact that this is supposed to be an employer-based system of training in this country. But it's particularly important that we address the whole training, because particularly with what's called the performance gap. I mean, there's been lots of research carried out to show, with heat pumps, for instance, heat pump installation, to show how the gap in the actual performance of the heat pumps is from what was intended in the design process is really down to lack of know-how. What we need is this comprehensive, recognized vocational education programs that also incorporate what I call climate literacy, at least up to level 3, and not just a dependence on short private training courses. Now, we also need, of course, as Wolfgang also said, to revise some of the occupational and qualification profiles we've got. And in fact, that is beginning to happen. So I think we shouldn't despair about this. There's now going to be a new domestic electrician, which definitely the whole profile and the qualification incorporates a lot of aspects related to climate and energy literacy. There's the development also now of a retrofit coordinator, which is at level 5, so quite a high level, but very important if you're going to have a successful, particularly large-scale retrofit program. Assessors, the electro-technical apprenticeship framework is about to be revised, and that should include solar and photovoltaics. But then what have we got? This difficult problem of insulation. Now, in many countries, the insulator is a recognized occupation with 4 years, in the case of Canada, of training. In this country, it's not always clear who an insulator is, and no clear profile. It can come under different areas. In fact, in many countries, it comes under different areas. In Belgium, it's a plasterer. So we have to really think about this whole, what is an insulator and what do they need to know? The possibility, and also to think about the possibility of career progression, overcoming these professional silos and divided trades, so that young people can see a future in what they're doing. Now, we've been looking at different training schemes that are going on, and these are pictures of, now in Ireland is doing rather a lot with government support. And because what is really needed is high quality workplace, workshop and classroom experience. You know, to successfully train a workforce, you need really well equipped workshops in the colleges. And we do find that in certain places now, particularly in Ireland, but also we've been going around colleges in Cardiff, in the College of North East London. They're just now developing a whole renewable energy, energy efficient center. I'll show you pictures of that in a minute. But because trainees depend on quality support in the college and the workplace from experienced trainers and colleagues. So you can't just depend on training the youngsters. It also needs considerable expertise in the existing workforce so that they can also act as trainers. And so it depends, it's a kind of circular. You need good continuing vocational education for the existing workforce, and you need to think about the new people coming in and provide good work experience for trainees. So these are some of the examples that we've been looking at. Now, Ireland has what we should have here in the UK. They've set up, with European Commission support, a NZEB, Nearly Zero Energy Building Retrofit Centre inside the Centre of the Technology Institute in Waterford, which is so wonderfully equipped. I've never seen anything like it. And they've also set up a Nearly Zero Energy Centre of Excellence for new building in Enniscorthy. Now, these top pictures are pictures that we took when we went there. So inside the college, they had, inside the centre, the retrofit centre, they had this house to demonstrate to the trainees how you insulate, how you produce air tightness, and at the same time the mechanical ventilation, which is of course necessary for that. As you can see from the picture here, they also look at different types of insulation, because there's of course an enormous variety in the types of insulation and what insulation can do, what different types can do. But the lower pictures are from going a visit to Cardiff and Vale College, where they now have a heat pump to demonstrate to the students, and also solar panels to illustrate how these can be installed. Now to finish up, just to say something about direct labour, which Ellen's talked about, and which I'm a great believer of, having looked at the history of it since the 1890s. Now we should, and often this history is forgotten, that it was a major source, it still is a major source of good quality construction in training for the whole industry. In the 70s, before Thatcher had a big go at the direct labour departments of the local authorities, many local authorities had large construction workforces, including the GLC had about 5,000. Now that Glasgow, which has managed to maintain its direct labour force, which Glasgow City Building has 2,200 today. But in the past, of course, that went together also, as it does now in Glasgow, with high levels of training. In Lambeth, for instance, in 1978, there were 1,000 construction workers and 100 apprentices to go with them. If we look at Glasgow in 1997, 305 apprentices altogether, with 70 taken on a year, and nowadays 260 taken on a year. So this is considerable amount of training that's going on in the direct labour department. And of course, the advantage of direct labour is that it's a considerable saving for the authorities, as the GLC argued in those days. So I'll finish by just pushing some of the advantages of actually carrying out these retrofit programs with local authority building departments. Now, partly because often it costs an enormous amount of money to carry out retrofit privately. And I was really happy to go to a meeting in Islington last week and to be told that they're now having insourced their maintenance workforce for social housing. They're now considering how that workforce can carry out retrofit programs. And I'm sure they're not the only local authority across the country, particularly those that have really been very systematic about insourcing all their services. It provides a check on private contractors if you do that. And also you can provide a complete service, because you've already got the planning departments. In the case of Islington, they're already manufacturing windows, etc. They've got a workshop to do that, where they train also. And then you carry out the retrofit. So you can develop a comprehensive, good quality retrofit program, beginning with the fuel poverty estates, and at the same time with stable employment, safe working conditions, and a decent wage. So direct employment of labour is, I think, critical to successful retrofit. Reducing subcontracting, having no labour, only subcontracting, and high levels of union organisation, with good quality, high levels of training in partnership with the further education colleges, challenging the white male exclusivity of the industry, and being politically accountable. I think that's the last is probably the most important. So with that, I'll finish. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Brilliant, Linda. Thank you so much. And what a fantastic place to finish on the potential that is already sort of bubbling up, but which could be so much more significantly in the way that you described there at the end, Linda, with direct labour organisations funded, local authorities funded to expand that work and that expertise in local communities with good, high quality, well unionised employment for a diverse workforce. So that's a really fantastic place to finish with, what we're fighting for, what the potential is that we're fighting for. There has been a lot of questions in the chat. Perhaps if we take our speakers to comment on questions that are raised, then we'll look to see if there is any sort of final comments that people make. If not, we'll kind of wrap up at that point, I would say. And Stuart, I will bring you in this round of speakers. So if there's something you want to contribute at that point, then let's do so. I'm thinking, let's take it this order, if this is okay with people. Wolfgang, can I bring you in first and then Linda? Would that be okay with people? So Wolfgang, if you'd be happy to do that, and then I could perhaps bring in Stuart and then perhaps bring in Ellen to round things up, unless I see any other questions. So Wolfgang, can I bring you in first?
I'm going to try and rattle through answers. First of all, consent and money. It's a very, very radical program. I mean, it is when you get down to it, and the recognition that it's a radical program has been there on the side of people who are opposed to doing this sort of thing, because they know that actually to do this thing properly, it needs planning and it needs democracy and it needs change. So we've got to get consent for it. But actually, things are happening all the time. Price rises, environmental things. And if we keep hammering away and we keep making the sensibility of what we're saying clear and dealing with the questions, then we get somewhere. Scale of the spend. Possibly every taxpayer paying £3,000 a year more on average would do it. And then we've got to factor in everything else. There's a lot of money, but obviously some taxpayers can pay more than others. I've just done that on the back of the kind of figures we're talking about at the moment. The costs of doing this could go down over time. So it's a big deal. David's question about the industry as it stands, and it was recognised by Linda as well, but the industry as it stands and how people feel about suddenly saying you're all going to be collectivised, absolutely right, but it's mixed. And Linda will know this in much more detail, but my experience over 25 years, and the last 10 years particularly, is that the picture that Linda portrays is very accurate, but in my job, we have a main contractor who's one of the best. It's as close to a local authority as we can get within the sector. And people are peeling off and saying, oh, I'd like to work for you. Not many, but a few are saying, well, actually, that's a good job. And if you've got the money to do this work at this level, with this level of staffing and time off to do courses and so on, then I'll work for you. The other firms, some of them are like, this is the way I've always done. Well, all of them are, this is the way I've always done it. Some of them have walked off the job because they cannot get the workers. They're basically recruiting on the M5 roundabout, as they say, and people are not coming. Other people are saying, actually, I can get the same money down the road for doing it the old way without having to worry about all this insulation, air tightness sort of thing. So we've got a hierarchy of reality. And that's why I said the National Climate Service would love to see large-scale, unionised, directly employed workforces, but they will be effectively in kind of competition as a model of how it could be done. Other firms can say, actually, I've got a proud family firm, I'd like to do a good job, I want to keep my nameplate in my vans and my people in my network of suppliers, but I'm going to get trained, or I'm going to employ somebody who's been trained, and then we'll get accredited. So those are the two of the ways to deal with that. Finally, couple of more, one more substantive thing, which is answer to Greg's many good points. The question of private landlords. Again, consent is a key thing, but it's failed to date because obviously that we know what the private landlord market is like. But you can actually have a situation, and I was in a meeting on this very subject a year ago where somebody's saying, I bought a place, it was going to be my pension, I was going to rent it out, all that, and I can't afford to do it up. And so you can actually say, well, actually, we'll do it up. Or if you really, really can't afford to do it up, you can sell it to the council and then it'll be done up. And so the people who are actually landlords and saying that they're going to have to sacrifice their mum to actually do it up, or genuinely can't afford to do it up, can get that done. So there are ways around this, but they're all very radical and they all need persuasion, but they have a sort of logic which hopefully will be on our side. Last thing was that things like sleeping upstairs and also kit homes and so on, they all have a role to play. The exact shape of the solution will change as we go down the road. We know that we can do it this way, insulating and putting these things in, but things like people living in communal groups where they have a room or a flat each and a larger facility, all of these things can help to reduce our footprint going forward, and we can be using old houses or new. So they're all part of the possibility, but having a clear main plan is really important. I hope I haven't gone on too long.
No, thank you, Wolfgang. No, not at all. Just before I bring in Linda, I would like to say on the question of cost, I mean, I think we just have to look at the pandemic to recognize that when it comes to money, it is a question of political will, as opposed to whether there is or there isn't a money tree. There is a money tree. It's a question of political will. Where does that money get directed to? Into whose pockets does that money go? And one other thing to point out, over the last 15, 20, even probably longer, we have seen a redistribution of wealth from the poor to the rich, in terms of decreased taxes on the wealthy, and increased pressure on the poor. And we have to look to reversing that distribution of wealth from the rich to the poor, whether that's a windfall tax on the very, very, very profitable fossil fuel companies in terms of addressing this immediate energy crisis, or increased taxes on the rich, and actually stop spending on the things that are a waste of our public sector taxes and money, which we've seen far too much of over the last 20 years, and let's start spending that money on the things that are needed. So sorry to jump in there, but a really important point, I think, in terms of like, where does the money come from? Linda, I'm going to hand over to you.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I've got a few points which may be a bit disjointed. First of all, I've had a few suggestions from what people have saying that you can learn retrofit by doing. I mean, I think that may have happened in the 19th century, but we're talking about a very different process today. And I should say that most training, this is initial training, is the majority of construction training takes place in colleges, in the classroom and in workshops. And increasingly, I mean, this is across Europe, the proportion of training that's work-based is I mean, it may be a third, but it's significantly less than it used to be in the past, because there's so much to learn. But I also wanted to say that in terms of this finance question, really, I mean, we should take into account other factors. The fact that that if it's the local authorities or a housing association, they're actually improving their stock, and they're probably significantly reducing their maintenance and repairs if it's well done. And at the same time, they're reducing their social security spending. But because there's not so, they're hopefully reducing some of the social problems. I mean, that estate in Glasgow, there was phenomenal problems with the fact that they suffered from fuel poverty. So I think we should take all those factors into account. It's not a direct funding question, and not a simple one either. But I think the key thing is to start with anyway, concentrating on these fuel poverty estates, because then you can build up, you can train the workforce, the work-based element of the workforce, and you work with the colleges, and you can create a large process. Because as long as we're just concentrating on individual houses, then like, as the government has thrown so much money into all that, and it all turned out to be a pretty disastrous. I should also say that with large scale, of course, then the planners, and Jill hopefully comes into this, because Section 106 clauses are critical. They're absolutely critical. And we've been using them with great success in terms of insisting on training, levels of training, on the number, how many people are trained, and also increasingly on energy requirements. So I would really think about also the procurement issues if we concentrate on the local authorities. And finally, I just wanted to put in a plea for this, to look at on the web at these nearly zero energy centres in Enniscorthy and Waterford, because they are really a model we could be using, especially for the existing workforce, to really push to have these specialist centres where construction workforce can go to upskill themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. I'm going to bring in Stuart. Stuart, you a little slot earlier on, so perhaps if you can use a little bit of time now to maybe cover some of the things you wanted to talk about earlier, and then I'll hand over to Ellen to wrap it up.
Yeah, sure. I'll try and make what I say relevant to what the discussion's been right now, I suppose, as well, because there was a few events I attended during COP26 that were run by architects who are currently involved in retrofitting. And having spoken to them about it in terms of what's actually being done, it's less than, they're telling me, I have no reason to doubt them, that less than 1% of the properties in the UK have been done. But in order for, I suppose, things to take off, it needs to be, it's recognised within that kind of SME, small, medium-sized enterprise community, that it needs to be around 10% or more for that to start scaling up. And at the current pace, that's not going to happen. So I suppose in terms of, and looking at the cost Glasgow-wide, now the feasibility study that I referred to earlier on is projecting that the cost is around about 20 billion to 2035. That's 11 billion in directly bringing certain properties up, mostly the pre-1919 tenements, that takes up a significant part of the stock in the Greater Glasgow region. And 600 million a year in recurring costs up to 2035 for improvements. So around about 20 billion they're projecting that at. Now, 20 billion is spent every year on a UK level fixing ordinary homes, not to bring them up to the climate sensitive or energy efficiency standards, just standard repairs. So in terms of reinvesting that money much more sensibly, and surely that approach needs to be, again, referred to earlier on, demystify this for people. We need to make this a common sense choice. It might be a common sense choice for everybody who's on this call, or for everybody that has a hook into this in some way, shape or form, but it's not for the wider population. And Linda had mentioned something that was becoming increasingly apparent as well. Whenever you're talking about the long-term pipeline of projects that's required for this, this is like multi-year terms that are going to span multi-parliaments and multi-council administrations. At the minute, certainly again in Scotland and in Glasgow, these projects are competitively tendered for on short-term basis. They are not, they don't build in the circular economy criteria that will measure alternative benefits, like the ease up in the pressure on the NHS, or the ease up in pressure on social services, or the decrease in fuel poverty. All the other indicators that are used by government to measure what's actually, where they should subsequently direct their funding. So that narrative and that case still has to be accepted, I would say, within a wider general consensus in society for what the overall benefits are going to be, because at the minute people just see a massive funding hole and no way to plug it. One of the other things that we met with Harvey, Des had spoken earlier on, it sounds like the TUC have met with Patrick Slater. Glasgow got an invitation to speak to Patrick Harvey, who is the Minister for, let me get this right, zero carbon buildings, active travel and tenants' rights. So the zero carbon buildings and the tenants' rights aspects are two direct things that should fit directly into this. Now, there was an article at the very start of January where the Scottish Government appear to they do not want to implement a passive house standard, despite that being the recommendations of Scotland's Climate Assembly. So whenever we ask Patrick about that, it looks as if the Scottish Government want to create some other standard. Now, what that other standard is, genuinely don't know. There's going to be a public consultation and a call for evidence around this. And if this is replicated in any way through other regions or local authorities or city regions or whatever governance authority is calling for this evidence, then I would suggest that people participate either as a trades council, as a trade union, or get community organizations to participate in that as well. Because I suppose that's the only, if that's where the funding lies at scale for this, and we have to convince the people who hold the purse strings for this to do it, then the only way we're going to leverage a campaigning strategy around that is to make it as easily digestible for folk and to make it seem like the easy win for everybody that it should be. Right, I'll stop there. That makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. It absolutely does. And being able to popularize those key elements of what a retrofit program would mean, how doable it is, those key elements, not just in terms of energy saving, but healthier homes, ending fuel poverty, reducing bills, and tackling the climate crisis, and delivering employment, good, trained, skilled employment in every local area. You know, if we can popularize those elements of it, it strikes me as well, Stuart, I mean, it's an obvious thing, and maybe it's a thing that has been done, perhaps the Trades Councils, Leeds Trades Council, but it does feel like there should be a simple model motion that can go to trade union branches across all sectors of the trade union movement, from education unions through to unions that have traditionally organised council workers, etc. Right out there, it should be something that unites. We have debates and we have arguments in the trade union movement, but this surely should be something that we can come behind, combined with the argument in favour of expansion of direct labour as a public sector employment, and something that can work collaboratively with sections of the private sector if they're willing to match the standards and deliver the training and those kind of things. Okay, Ellen, I'm going to ask you to finish up the meeting, and after Ellen's spoken, we'll just do a little bit of housekeeping to give a few notices of where people can go after this. But for the moment, let me hand over to you, Ellen.
Okay, well, I guess a lot of what I would have said has already been covered, really, by Wolfgang and Linda and Stuart, who said quite a lot about the difficulty, like the political difficulties of what we're proposing, and some of the things that we need to do to get really to get mass campaigning behind it. I think I wanted to take up the. I was interested in David's point about the sort of pride that people, that some of the particularly sole traders and people who have their own businesses, that they will take in the fact that they've built up their own business, and the more general point about is it regressive to do all this work free at the point of delivery, as opposed to as opposed to raking in the finance from the able to pay sector, and I know that's generally speaking that has been the approach, is to offer incentives to the able to pay sector to mobilise their capital into sort of getting getting enough of a market established to be able to then build up the workforce, build up the training, build up the supply chains and things. That's the logic that's generally being used. But I mean, I would argue that is not the most efficient way. I think it's we've been trying to do this for a long time, and it has proven to be very inefficient in terms of the scale and the speed of the work that needs to be done. But it is not the most progressive way of doing it, because what we're talking about is, I mean, as Suzanne said, when we're talking about a national climate service, we're talking about it on a similar model to the National Health Service. Now, the most efficient way of doing, the most progressive way of doing this is to do it through progressive general taxation, which then means everybody, the service is there. I mean, it's supposed to be there free at the point of use, although even within the National Health Service, this is not comprehensive. I mean, I have to pay a lot for my dental care and for my the glasses that I have to wear. It's not, even though it's on the health service, it's still really expensive. So, it's not comprehensive as it should be. But the essential concept is that we pay for this through progressive taxation, so that the cost is redistributed across and is therefore accessible to the people who are on the lowest incomes and who need it the most. And I think that that's really is the only fair way to do it, but also it's the only really efficient way to do it. That doesn't mean to say that people shouldn't be allowed to, pay for their own for their own work to be done, and that they shouldn't pay a small business of their own choice or whatever, or even do it collectively as part of a DIY community group or something. I'm not saying that there isn't space for all that, but there are difficulties that when you've got such a highly fragmented workforce as we have at the moment, the fragmentation makes the integration very, very difficult, as I think that some of the speakers have already made quite clear. It makes a difficulty about training. It makes a difficulty about the getting away from the kind of siloing of the different skills that Linda's talked about, where you have some traders who do rewiring, and some that install heating systems, and some that do roofs and things. But it's not. I'm not dismissing your question, because I do think it's something that has to be massively. We have to create a big public conversation about this. Because people very much have, I think, the kind of neoliberal reasoning in their heads, and say to people, "Oh no, I want to do it this way." We've got to have a conversation about it. I think that we are, in some ways, we're at an incredibly depressing point. We're all people are under fire from all directions. The health service is under attack, massively underfunded, being broken up with, obviously, with a view to as much privatisation as possible. And the cost of living crisis, the cost of fuel crisis specifically. But I think, as Suzanne's already and other people have already talked about, this is also our opportunity, because it's our opportunity to show how all of these different issues are interconnected. That when you bring together, we've got a tradition of campaigning, of housing campaigning. We've got organisations like Acorn and Living Rent. We've got Fuel Poverty Action campaign. We've got campaigns for council housing, which is something that I've been involved in for quite a while as well. That when you bring all of these things together, and yes, campaigns for to defend the health service as well, and make those connections, you do have the beginnings of something much more powerful. It's really important to get away from this, and it's complicated, I think, from a campaign perspective, because we end up with oh my gosh, there's meant to be, there's a cost of living demo on Saturday, but then is there a stop the war demo, and then is there something else, and they all actually. This kind of integration and the alliance building within within progressive and anti-capitalist social movements is just as much of a challenge and just as important. But there are some reasons to be optimistic about it. What was I just wanted to pick up on perhaps a more specific point. I think the idea of the right to sell was raised, and it was in relation to the private rented sector, which is, of course, is the really big bugbear here. By far the worst standards and the highest levels of fuel poverty and general exploitation. But the right to sell has also been raised in another context, which is the question of undercrowding or under occupancy, typically by perhaps older people who might be living in a building where they might have raised a family, but they might now be just living there on their own, and it's too big for them to look after. They might not be able to afford the repairs, and they might not be able to afford the energy efficiency measures, because you can own your own building, you can own your own house and still be poor in terms of ability to spend. And one of the options there could actually be a right to sell to a local authority to become part of the council stock. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that because I thought it's a useful idea to have in the mix. And then just finally, I think to say, I mean, yes, we need to bring in the issue of demand for retrofit and fuel poverty into all local elections and national election campaigns. The idea of a model motion for all trade union branches. So we kind of thought in Leeds, we had it for a while, because about 18 months ago, we had a motion passed in a Leeds Unite branch. It was a general branch, a geographic branch, which asks for a mass retrofit project, also asks for the trade union branches and for the trade unions, as an organisation, to instigate and support an alliance or coalition to create a campaign for such a mass retrofit programme. And that motion eventually, after a long time, made its way up to the upper levels of Unite, and was being looked at by national policy officers with a view to being kind of tweaked up into something that can become a national policy. At the moment, it seems to be lying dormant, but I think, no, obviously what's needed there is for it not to be just going from one particular branch in one particular locality, but I think we need to perhaps go back to the drawing board on that and draw something up that we can really do a push on getting people to get it through their branches in all of the unions and all over the country as much as possible. Somebody's just messaged, Jill, I think we can send the text of that around on the CAC2 mailing list at some point. And then people can have a look and see what they might want to do with it. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you, and thanks for coming, everybody.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Ellen. And I wonder if Fliss has got a minute just to put, if anybody isn't on the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union email list, if Fliss has got a minute while I'm just wrapping up, to pop the details of how you can sign up and make sure that you're part of that mailing list. It does strike me, as listening to Stuart and listening to Ellen at the end there, both of whom through their own trades councils have been involved with campaigning around this issue. It does strike me that there's perhaps a role for maybe a few people to come together and organise a kind of open meeting where we invite as many people involved with campaigning as possible to bring together something that could be greater than the sum of its parts in terms of a campaign for, I know there are lots of things happening out there, but just something that's very open, brings as many people together as possible, so we can start collectively maximising, and it might be something that those kind of trades councils that have already been involved with campaigning might be able to initiate, lead on. I don't know, it's a thought, but it's definitely there is definitely kind of so much happening out there to bring people together and be greater than the sum of our parts, whilst also able to continue our kind of separate campaigning, would be, I think, really welcome in the current context, and perhaps be able to make some impact and some headway. Placards, yeah, absolutely. That doesn't mean that people should wait for initiatives. There's loads of initiatives, as Wolfgang is suggesting there, that people can take in their local areas through trades councils, or simply just setting up a public meeting and inviting people that might be interested in collaborating and working together on local campaigning work in this context. Do keep sharing links. The chat will be saved. But thanks again to the speakers. Thanks to to Linda Clark, to Wolfgang Kuchler, to Ellen Rowbottom. Thanks to Stuart Graham for contributing. Thanks to all of you who have participated. I think that would be a great idea, Wolfgang. We're going to take this is part of a series of meetings. We're going to take a break next week. It's International Women's Day next week, and there's a lot of meetings happening for people to celebrate International Women's Day. The following week, which is Monday the 15th, it's been shared in the chat, is our next meeting in this series of meetings, which will be focused on transport, which is chapter 4 in the book, Creating a Green, Affordable and Accessible Network for All Climate Jobs in Transport. That should be a great meeting. Again, a whole range of really excellent speakers, including Tahir Latif, who is the author of that chapter in the report. Can I encourage David and others who haven't yet read our report to do so? You can download it, or you can order copies for yourself, or trade union branches or community groups, or whatever. Wolfgang, that might be a nice idea, and I think that was the notices for me. I think that's the notices for me in terms of the meeting. So, oh yes, no, there was one other thing. The meeting has been recorded. Somebody asked earlier. It will be added onto the Campaign Against Climate Change website. So there'll be a recording. Also, slides have been shared before. So perhaps Ellen, Wolfgang, Linda, I don't know if you're able to share your slides. So they're also accompanying the recording. That would be really, really excellent.